Before there was a web to surf, going online began with a sound. They were negotiating, testing the line, agreeing on a language they could both speak. When the screaming stopped, you were somewhere else. By the early 1990s, millions of Americans were dialing into that sound every night. Almost none of them were on the internet. Them had never heard of it. They were calling places with names like CompuServe, Prodigy and America Online. And alongside those giants, they were calling tens of thousands of tiny systems that lived on single computers in spare bedrooms and basements, run by hobbyists, one phone call at a time. This is the story of America's first online decade. The walled electronic cities, the bedroom kingdoms, a corporate bet that burned through more than $500 million, and the sound a whole generation can still hear in their heads. It starts in a snowstorm. In January of 1978, a blizzard buried Chicago under more than a foot of snow. The city closed. 2 members of a local computer hobbyist club found themselves stuck at home with time on their hands. One of them, Ward Christensen, was a programmer at IBM. The other, Randy Sues, was a hardware builder. Their club had talked for months about an idea, a computer that members could call with a modem, to read announcements and leave messages for each other, like the cork bulletin board on a hobby shop wall, except made of software. They split the job between them. Ward wrote the code. Randy assembled the machine, a home-built S100 bus computer that would live in his basement, because Randy's house was in the city and the phone line was cheaper there. In about 2 weeks of nights and weekends, it worked. They called it CBBS, the Computerized Bulletin Board System. It answered its first call on February 16, 1978. One computer, one phone line, one caller at a time. They had no way to know it, but they had just invented a medium. Anyone who copied the idea would be called a system operator, a sysop for short. And over the next 15 years, tens of thousands of people would copy the idea. To call a board in 1978, you needed a modem. Modem was a strange object. Many were acoustic couplers, a box with 2 rubber cups that gripped the telephone handset like a mask, whistling data into the mouthpiece at 300 baud. 300 baud is about 30 characters per second. Text crawled onto the screen slower than most people read. You did not browse anything. You read a line as it arrived, and you thought about whether the next screen was worth the wait. In 1981, a company in Georgia changed the hardware side of the story. The Hayes Smart Modem plugged straight into the phone jack and could dial the phone itself, on command from the computer. No rubber cups, no dialing by hand. Calling a computer became something software could do. There was one more rule of the road, and it shaped the whole culture: the telephone bill. A call across town was free. A call to the next area code was billed by the minute. So people called the boards they could reach for free, and the world of the boards became intensely local. The people you argued with at midnight were people you could meet at a pizza place on Saturday. Many boards held exactly those meetups. A bulletin board system was one computer in one house with one phone line run by one person. The sysop paid for the machine, paid for the line, and set the rules. Some boards were about ham radio, or genealogy, or Star Trek. Some were message boards with no files at all. Whatever the board was, it was somebody's personality with a phone number attached. One line meant one visitor at a time. If the board was good, the line was busy, and callers sat with dialing software hammering redial into the night. Getting through felt like winning something. The boards even grew their own visual art form. The screen could show 16 colors of text, a set of blocky shapes. That was enough. Artists built title screens and menus out of pure text, a style called ANSI art, traded them like graffiti tags. The best art groups were famous across the country, on systems most people could never afford to call. There were games, too, played through the phone line in pure text. Door games, they were called, because the board opened a door to a separate program. In Trade Wars, you ran a merchant starship. In Legend of the Red Dragon, you fought, flirted, and died in a village that remembered you tomorrow. Most boards gave you a handful of turns per day, so the game continued only if the whole community kept calling back. Then, in 1984, a programmer in San Francisco named Tom Jennings solved the loneliness of local boards. His software, Fido, let boards call each other automatically in the dead of night, when phone rates were lowest, and swap bundles of messages. A note posted in Baltimore could ripple board by board to Seattle in a day or two. The network was called FidoNet, and it was a volunteer postal service made of hobby computers. By the early 1990s, it connected tens of thousands of boards around the world. No company owned it. No one was paid. The whole thing ran on allowance money and a mail hour at 4 in the morning. While the hobbyists built their kingdoms one phone line at a time, a company in Columbus, Ohio, was playing a different game entirely. CompuServe had existed since 1969 as a time-sharing business. It owned rooms full of mainframe computers and rented computing time to corporations by the hour. Those mainframes sat idle every night. In 1979, the company started selling that idle nighttime capacity to home computer owners and discovered it had a consumer product. The price of admission was a call to a local access number and an hourly fee. In turn, a subscriber got newswires, stock quotes, an encyclopedia, airline schedules, software to download, and forums where the actual engineers from hardware and software companies answered questions. In 1979, it offered electronic mail. In 1980, it added the CB simulator, named after Citizens Band Radio, dozens of strangers, typing to each other live, under handles instead of names. It was the first time most users ever saw a chat room. CompuServe was text. You navigated by typing commands and menu numbers at a prompt. It's gray, dense, and priced like a utility. Roughly $6 an hour at 300 baud, billed by the minute, and more for faster speeds. Users called it CompuSpend and watched the clock while they typed. It did not matter. Through the 1980s, CompuServe was simply where the serious online world lived. By 1990, it had around 600,000 subscribers, the largest consumer service in America, owned since 1980 by the tax preparation company H&R Block. The biggest names in American business looked at this little industry and decided the hobbyists and the timesharers had it all wrong. In 1984, IBM, Sears, and CBS formed a joint venture to build an online service for ordinary families. CBS later dropped out. IBM and Sears kept going and kept writing checks for years. By the time the service, named Prodigy, rolled out nationwide in 1990, the partners had poured more than $600 million into it. Prodigy did not look like a terminal. It looked like a magazine. Color graphics on every screen, drawn with a technique that could squeeze pictures through a slow modem. There was news, weather, sports, columnists, an encyclopedia, banking, and shopping, all behind a friendly menu, all for one flat monthly price of $9.95, while the competition ran a meter. The business model was the radical part. Prodigy was built to make its money like television, keep the audience large, keep the price flat, sell the audience to advertisers, and sell them merchandise. Ads ran across the bottom of nearly every screen. Sears and IBM were not selling Connect Time. They were selling America a digital shopping mall. America came, but it behaved wrong. By late 1990, Prodigy had around 465,000 subscribers and was closing in on CompuServe. But the subscribers were not shopping. They were talking. The message boards and email, the features Prodigy considered a sideshow, were carrying enormous traffic, and every message cost Prodigy money it had planned to make back at the mall. In the fall of 1990, Prodigy did something its members read as a betrayal. It announced a fee on heavy email use, beyond a monthly allowance, 25 cents a message. Members organized the protest on Prodigy itself, and when the company shut the protest down and expelled organizers, the story landed in the national press. A service that had sold itself as family-friendly was now the service that read the room and charged for the mail. Prodigy never found its footing as a mall. Its Its members had already shown everyone what people actually wanted from an online service. What they wanted was each other. The company that acted on that lesson was, for most of this story, an afterthought. In November of 1985, a small Virginia startup called Quantum Computer Services launched an online service for the Commodore 64, the cheap home computer of the era. The service was called Quantum Link. It was graphical, it was playful, and it was social from the first screen, chat, games, and a people directory, not a command prompt. Quantum Link even hosted an experiment decades ahead of its time. Habitat, built with Lucasfilm, where subscribers walked cartoon bodies through a shared cartoon world, years before anyone said the words online world out loud. In 1989, Quantum renamed its service America Online. Soon after, a young marketing executive named Steve Case took over as chief executive. Against CompuServe's 600,000 subscribers and Prodigy's corporate parents, America Online was a distant third, a small company with a friendly product and no obvious advantage. Its product made a different first impression. Where CompuServe greeted you with a prompt, America Online greeted you with a voice. Welcome. Its client software, launched for DOS in 1991 and for Windows the following year, put chat rooms, mail, and forums behind big, colorful buttons. The service was built, top to bottom, around the one thing Prodigy had discovered by accident. People pay to be where other people are. Then, America Online solved distribution. Under marketing chief Jan Brandt, the company began mailing its software across America, free on floppy disks and later on a flood of CDs. The disks fell out of magazines. They arrived in the mailbox, unasked. Each one carried a free trial, and behind the trial, a credit card form. It was crude, it was expensive, and it worked. 500,000 members in 1993 became more than 1 million by August of 1994, and the curve was still bending upward. Step back to around 1993 and look at the map. CompuServe, Prodigy, America Online, and a shelf of smaller rivals like Genie and Delphi, each with its own software, its own content, its own culture. Around them, at the peak of the era, tens of thousands of bulletin boards still ringing in the night. Every one of these places was a walled city. CompuServe subscriber could not message a Prodigy subscriber. Signing up meant choosing which city you lived in, and the companies liked it that way. The wall was the business. The first cracks in the walls came from an unlikely direction: electronic mail. One by one, in the early 1990s, the services connected their mail systems to a scruffy academic network that had been growing quietly for 2 decades, funded by research money, owned by no one. Internet, it was called. To the online industry, it looked like plumbing between cities, nothing more. Then, in September of 1993, America Online connected its members to Usenet, the Internet's sprawling global message boards. The old inhabitants had endured a flood of confused newcomers every September when college freshmen arrived. They watched this September fail to end. Millions of ordinary subscribers were now loose on the open network, and there would never be a normal September again. The walls had a hole in them, through which you could see something coming. A piece of software from a university lab in Illinois called a web browser. What it did to the walled cities, to the boards, and to the sound of the modem itself is a story for another time. So, before the web, 2 snowed-in hobbyists in Chicago invented the bulletin board in 1978, and an underground of tens of thousands of local boards grew up around sysops, ANSI artists, door games, and a mail hour at 4 in the morning. Above them rose 3 walled cities. CompuServe, the metered text utility where the professionals lived. Prodigy, the $600 million corporate mall whose customers insisted on talking instead of shopping. And America Online, the underdog that built its whole service out of people, then buried the country in free disks. 1 million Americans a night were now dialing into cities that could not speak to each other, and the internet was still just a rumor beyond the walls. The companies thought the walls were the product. The people inside knew better. They had come for each other. So when a door to a bigger world finally opened, they walked straight through it, and the walled cities never got them back. If you want the record set straight, hit like and subscribe to Errata.